Alright guys, today we're going to be going over the state of the meta for green going into nationals, and I know this is sort of a meme, because I could probably just make this video like 2 minutes and we can be done with it, right? But I did want to talk in depth a little bit about green and just giving some personal opinion on this color as we go into the next about month and a half or so of competitive play, or the last portion of the season for competitive play, which is the most important here because we have nationals and worlds and everything. So we'll kind of just start with what green is, or what kind of is left of green. It's in a terrible position going into nationals. I would give this probably a 1 out of 5. Ban list with the Frieza ban, or the Frieza limit, actually did hurt green quite a bit, because a lot of green decks that were not Gohan, even Gohan to an extent, was really relying on the Unison Frieza combination to kind of help navigate the mid game, right? You would throw a Unison down, even actually early game, if your decks like Go Broads, some of the other Unison decks that played like one-drop Unisons, you're really reliant on Frieza to allow yourself to stay alive, right? Especially against Red playing small battle cards, you're just able to pop the one that you want. Gives you a little more defense, and then as you get into the later game, green still scales very, very good into the late game. However, there's just not a lot to choose from. The recent ban list did really help the other colors a lot more, and green sort of was taken down a tier, and more so one particular deck was taken down a tier, not the entire color. But there's a lot of options for green that you should not play. There's a lot of green decks that are just not as good, lost a lot of steam, they're not good into the red meta. There's a lot. It's a lot of setup, and Gohan was sort of the end-all be-all of green, and still really is. I mean, Gohan is still the green deck you should play. It's still pretty good in a way. If you match up Gohan against other meta decks right now, it is too slow. It's too slow. It takes too much time to get going. I know there's people who disagree with that, but it does take too much time to get going. And because of that, the late game for this deck is great. You take yourself down to 3. You have to use 2 energy to Z Awaken. It's pretty tough. And unless you're running Raging Burst or Bursting Rage, this deck is a bust. It's not as good. You can't really rely on the Goku Seeker Rare anymore. You have to use Bursting Rage so you can get into your Z Leader for your kill turn. The defense that card provides also is very, very good. You get to draw a card, you get to go into your Z Awaken. But then after your turn, your Z Awaken's gone. So it's you have to make sure you're able to kill, and I don't think you should be reliable on that as your win condition with your leader. Now, there are other options that people might try to play, but the deck definitely has lost a lot of power because of that. I would consider this deck, out of the tier 1 decks, if I was doing my own tier list, this is probably the bottom of all of the tier 1 decks. It's probably, I don't want to say the worst, but without the Android 16, this deck definitely falls off now, because you are using that extra energy for something else. And sure, you can use Uneasing, but you can only do that so many times, and you are getting rid of a card in hand. There's a lot of variables to that. And without the protection of the Unison, deck definitely struggles later on in the game to just stay on curve. You can drop an 8-drop, that's great. More likely, most decks should remove the 8-drop that turn. They'll drop another 8-drop, and you're kind of going back and forth, and this is really all you're doing for most of the game, is just cycling 8-drops. So I definitely think and because of how many people have actually played against the deck now, they know sort of how to beat the deck. People are going to have to find different ways of playing this deck. I think if you take the current build that people have played, so like let's say the last North American event that Gohan won, if you took that build and you took out Android 16, the deck performs much worse. So the deck has to be rebuilt, because right now the deck is weaker than Pan. And Pan is a deck that you should see quite a bit at Nationals, whether it's at the bottom tables or just kind of spread throughout the meta. You're going to see a lot of red especially Pan. Pan sort of just was almost dumpstering this deck as it was, but now without 16 to awaken yourself earlier, to Z awaken yourself earlier, you're in a lot of trouble. And Bursting Rage doesn't do anything against Pan, by the way, because most of their battle cards are 15 and 20k. So that's a matchup that it's really hard for Gohan to beat. Gohan really struggles against Megikabura. So those are two of the top tier decks that you're going to be seeing at probably at both nationals. I would say actually any of the nationals. I would say both nationals because there's more than just two, but you know what I mean. So there's going to be those two decks particularly. This deck struggles against. So if this deck struggles against two of the best meta decks, it might not be the best opportunity to play Gohan anymore. I'm sure someone's going to say that I'm wrong. That's okay. Go and take it to Nats, win with it. We'll talk about it. That's quite fine. So there are some other green decks I did want to discuss because not all green is bad. Any green deck that really relied on Frieza Unison combination definitely got hit, and Gohan obviously, but everything else in green was not touched. So there are some decks that don't really rely on that, or they don't rely on it as much, and I think Broly is one of those decks. So it's untouched. None of the cards that you play in Broly were touched on the ban list, and this deck can go very tall very quickly. You have access to burn damage and critical damage, and you have a built-in deny, as I would like to call it. So when you swing at battle cards with a Broly card, your opponent can't activate counters. Which is nice about this is that you can swing into cards to clear, as well as a lot of your cards have effects when they KO a battle card. You can restand, draw a card, burn a card, all that kind of stuff, right? So you're actually being able to deal with your opponent's hand and their board without them really being able to do anything other than combo out. The problem with this deck is it does take some time to set up. You got to play a Broly Paragus, you got to play the Ring, you got to then tap a card, or tap the Broly card to make a Broly skillless, then you can awaken. It's really strange. Definitely a mid to late game deck, as most green decks are. And it's still green, which is, I would say is a downside still, because you have all these heavy cards, defensive cards you can use, but green doesn't have any energy manipulation. So a little bit on the struggle schedule there. But it's still I would say it's a good deck, just no one really plays this deck enough to make it relevant. But who knows, maybe someone will take it to Nats and surprise people. The other deck, I actually think this is probably I'm going to say the best green deck, but I definitely think this deck should be looked at for if you want to play green, this is definitely a deck to look at for nationals. So Trunks Mai, I know to a lot of us was kind of laughed at when it first came out, because like, oh, this is just a really bad version of Go Bros. You play all these tokens and tokens die. It's really bad, right? However, this deck has a lot of defense, right? One of the things being able to awaken and restand an energy as a green deck now is very good. You get the extra energy. But also, like, this deck just draws a ton of cards. You do use the healing pod, so you do have to kind of rely on healing pod, being able to play out your minds from the drop, and then being able to draw off those. And the healing pod definitely gives you a 2 draw per turn, which is very good. And if you have a green Saiyan in play, all of your Earthling tokens gain barrier. So you do have the ability of keeping all of your tokens alive by just playing a Saiyan, and particularly playing a Saiyan that has barrier. So then all of your tokens have barrier, so they can't actually kill them with spot removals or secret ID or dormant, all that other kind of shit that got like Token Toa in trouble, right? Not only that, it plays all of the good green cards. This is a green Saiyan, so you have access to every green Saiyan card there is, as well as just generic good green stuff. Again, if you are playing this deck, or if you're playing any green deck, just remember you are playing, unfortunately, at a disadvantage. However, you could be playing at a major advantage in some cases because of the disrespect to green. So another big thing is that if people are not really expecting green at all, you might have people who don't play the anti-hand control cards, the Boras, the Gohan, the Vegeta in this case. If they're playing green for some reason, they don't expect green, right? But being able to hand control your opponent while also being able to deal damage with double strikers and triple strikers and crits, it can tax any deck, right? And you still do have access to good hand destruction in this game. So definitely a deck I would suspect to see a little bit of, probably sprinkled in there. I do suspect to see one green deck in Top Cut, at least one green deck, whether that's this deck, whether that's another deck that's on this list, whether that's Gohan. I expect to see at least one green deck because I think someone's going to play green and they're going to do well. They just have to get a decent bracket, and if you go against decks who aren't expecting green, you're going to be favored in that particular time frame. So just something to watch out for. I would test against this deck just so you understand the play lines, because if you play against this deck and you're not ready for it, you're not ready for green, you can lose. It's still a deck. You can lose, so they can still take your they can still take your life down to 0. They can still take your hand down to 0. There's definitely some good stuff that green can still do, and I think this is probably one of the better green decks to do that for. I would say slightly above Gohan, just because Gohan, this deck doesn't rely on a Z leader, and you're still able to draw a ton of cards. And I think it's a little bit cheaper. I think some of the bodies you can play in this deck are just slightly cheaper. I know like Time Chamber is such a cool effect, but you know, it is what it is. And then the last green deck I just wanted to touch base with real quick, which is going to be the Cell Expert deck, Return of the Ultimate Life Form. So this deck definitely took a hit again because of the Frieza limit. This deck was really like play Unison on turn 2, Awaken, have access to Unison, have access to Dormant, have access to Frieza. This deck's not a Saiyan. Even though Cell has Saiyan DNA, he can't play Uneasing, so that's one really big floodgate down. The deck has ability of criticals and board removal with the leader, and does have a very, very powerful game ending turn 5, being able to go into Perfect Force and then into Xenocell. Basically just win any game. And this deck is, I would say over the past few months, has definitely been played as a pure hand destruction deck. So using like the Spirit Bomb Goku that combos 3 green cards from the drop, and you use, I think it's like an Android 16 super combo, and essentially that super combo forces your opponent to discard a card. So you swing with it, it's like a 30k double striker, triple striker or something, and then you make your opponent discard 3 cards. Outside of just making them discard cards throughout the entire game, right? So it's a very powerful card, but it's going to take a lot of setup. Unfortunately, with the meta being predominantly red, you're not going to have the time to set up, and because this deck can't play Uneasing, you're really reliant on only Dormant. It's not as good. So I would say this is probably not a deck to play at Nats. I just wanted to talk about it just because I know it was a deck that I thought was still pretty interesting. I think once we get a little more green support for androids, like if we got a negate or something like that, this deck and the other Cell deck, the one that plays out the tokens, I think both of those decks actually are pretty reasonably powerful. They just need some form of other like an android negate, like a floodgate or something that they can use. So go into some of the new stuff. The TPs were pretty meh, but King Piccolo is a very powerful card, and this is a card you can use in the Cell deck, because if your leader is not a green Saiyan card, you can play this card. It's reduced for every non-green Saiyan battle card among cards in your Z energy and your drop. And when you play it, you pop a 5 cost and you remove a marker off of Unison, and it's a 20k unique crit. It's pretty cool. I did not talk about King Piccolo, which is a deck that I'm sure someone's going to ask me about. King Piccolo, I think is just doesn't do enough. Unfortunately, if we were in a more blue heavy meta, I think King Piccolo would be much better. We saw that before the last Nationals at the core event. We saw King Piccolo do very well. We were still in the Gamma meta. I think it was Gamma. But that particular King Piccolo deck did very well because of all of the blue that was running around. With red being the counter opposite, aggro deck, this deck cannot out aggro red. It's just not going to happen. You could do a lot, but like this deck can't play Uneasing. You're really relying on Dormant, and again, you have to play this card now instead of Frieza, which is fine, but this card costs 1 while Frieza costs 0. So take it as you will. But I think this card is very good for non-green Saiyan decks. You don't have a lot of those, unfortunately. That's like this. It's like King Piccolo, Cell, and Cooler Unison are probably the 3 big ones. You also have like the Frieza starter deck from set 10 that you can play this card in. So there's some decks, but they're all below Rogue tier or Rogue tier at the most. So but as soon as Bandai releases, we might get one next set. As soon as we get a non-Saiyan green leader that just has generic good stuff in it, this is going to be able to be played in that. So some things as to why I think green can do well. I do think there are some ways that green can do. Obviously, just having really good matchups, but green does have a lot of defense. So outside of like the uneasings, the dormants, those kind of things, you have these two particular cards here, which actually make pushing into green very difficult. So Goku's Kamehameha Deflection is a great, excellent negate to use in a red format. Every red deck, most of their cards outside of their boss monster are going to be 4 or less. If you just look at a red list like Pan, majority of their cards are 4 or less, obviously outside of their secret rare, and they might run like a Goku Piccolo 8-drop or something, right? Most of the cards are going to be between, actually most of them are going to be between 3 and 1, or actually between like what, energy 3 cost and 4 cost. So you're going to be able to kill everything. So to counterattack, limit 1, you negate the attack and you pop a 4 cost or less. It's fine. So you negate 1 attack, you kill something else, you kill 2 birds with 1 stone, so to speak, and obviously it's only a once per turn, but being able to activate 2 of these in the game, you're going to be able to just remove shit, and that's really what you want. You want to be able to just stop their aggression, and you can basically stop 2 attacks with this. Then you have Cell Destroying Kamehameha, not a fun card to push into. If you're playing against a green deck and you go, oh, I'm going to go to 30k, and they just pop this down, and they rip a card out of your hand, and then they combo 5 more K. You got 2 cards out of their hand, but they also got a card out of your hand. And it might be a card that you really, really need, like a Secret Rare, Super Combo, Negate, things like that. This card also is very, very deadly when they are pushing into you for game. Because if your opponent can stack, a double striker or a triple striker with 2 of these, it's probably game. You're not comboing out of that. So these are 2 cards you have to be worried about, but also if you're a green player, you should be utilizing both of these cards in your deck. Now, specifically this card, there are some other green Z extra cards, but having a Z extra card in general, doesn't have to be this one, but just having a green extra card, a green Z extra card, is going to be crucial to surviving in the mid game and the late game as a green deck. Why is 2 of the green decks that I showed off, both of them play field spells, right? You play Healing Pod or you play Time Chamber, right? Activating with this or any of the Z extra cards, now you have 2 extra cards in play, which reduce a lot of the other defensive cards you're probably going to have to rely on now that freezes down to limit 1. The 2 of those cards are these particular cards here. We have Cooler, Effortless Strike, and King Cold Supreme Ruler. I know everyone's been using King Cold now, so if you need foils, let me know. I got a bunch of them. But this is a 1-drop negate, stops your opponent from attacking unless they discard a card. It's just kind of like your weird version of like Mecha Frieza. But it's still very good. Just a 1-drop battle card negate that you can play out for 1 since you have an extra card, a Z extra card, and you have a field spell. So very good. Cooler is a counterplay that hits 4 or less and costs 1 less for each green extra card in your battle area and your drop. So if you have your field, your Z extra card, and like a Homicidal Clones or like an Uneasing or something in your drop area, this card costs 1 on your opponent's turn, and it puts a 4 less in the drop area. And then if they have more than 8 cards in hand, they discard a card. So again, hits 4 or less. It's very, very good into red into this red format. If you can kind of curve the game into the mid game, both of these cards are going to give you tons of value against red decks, and most red decks really can't stop these from doing anything. They can play Koitsukai, but why are you going to play Koitsukai against a green deck? That just seems kind of silly, right? And then finally, the secret I want to talk about is Son Goku Peace Resolution. So unless you're playing Gohan, you should play Bursting Rage. If you're playing any other Saiyan deck, you should play this card. Like Trunks, like Gobros, like Videl, or Saiyan Earthling, or like King Piccolo, right? This card being able to give something 10k, right? And then you can pay another energy to give your leader 20k. Your leader will restand and gain triple strike. So you can swing with your leader. You can then do some other stuff, combo this on top of something. Predominantly, probably the 8 drops Goku and Gohan, so you can burn them a damage, and then restand your leader to make it a 40k or 35k or whatever it is, right? And then triple strike, and then you'll triple strike for the turn, and then your opponent, and then your leader will have the 20k going into your opponent's next turn, so you'll be a 35k. So it does give you some defense, but also gives you another way of winning the game. I think this is an excellent secret rare. I think the other ones are good, like the Vermilion Saiyans or whatever it's called, the Wicked Saiyans. One's okay. I don't think people are going to be playing it too much. You have the Ape. Again, I don't think people are going to be playing the Ape too much. You have some other cheeky green secret rares, but this is probably the best one to play, I think, unless you're playing Gohan. Like I said, unless you're playing Gohan, you play Bursting Rage. If you're playing any other green decks, this is that can fit this, you know, the requirements, of course, like Saiyan, Earthling, or Namekian. You play this guy here. So, but that is the video. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. Like I said, I wanted to give green a little bit of light, because I do think green has some legs. Very small legs. Very, very tiny legs. But I think they have the ability to be... to perform at a very maybe small margin, you know, very, very, very small percentage of them, but I think someone is going to do well with green in some capacity. I think someone's going to be able to make top cut with green. So, but that is the video. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. If I missed the deck, let me know down in the comments. Let me know what you guys think of green going into nationals. If you guys agree, if you guys disagree, let me know down below. Like and subscribe, and thank you guys again for the support as we go roll into to national season. Very excited. We're going to start doing some Fusion World reveals as well. So stay tuned for that. So thank you guys for watching, and I will see you guys in the next video.